Hi guys, Mr. Simons here. I want to talk about Ransom, part 5. This is the final chapter in Ransom. So just before we get to this final chapter, I want to talk about time. So time is an interesting and fluid thing within Ransom. It's a really interesting device that Malouf uses. And you'll notice that he kind of muddies that clear timeline of events, and he's going forward and backwards in time. He uses flash forwards and flash backs. Sometimes this is with characters and they are having visions of what's going to happen in the future. But sometimes those characters are reminiscing about what happened in the past. But sometimes also we've got the narration actually looking forward or backward in time. So that third person omniscient narrator, and that narration is interesting because sometimes it delves into the mind of the character and we're kind of having to interpret that, oh, this is a vision of the character themselves, or this is the character reminiscing, but sometimes it's the narration itself. The narrator actually is looking forward or backwards in time, secondary to what the character is thinking. It gives this sense of timelessness to the story, and perhaps when you read it for the first time you thought, what is going on? Where are we? What is the present moment? Because it moves kind of so fluently from millennia ago and then to present time with Achilles, and then so it's an interesting thing to compare that to this idea that the Iliad and the Odyssey, these stories from millennia ago, they've been recycled and reused for a long time, and we see elements of these stories in present day Marvel, comic books, movies. We still see all of these things mirrored in present day movies and stuff. So it's interesting that that timelessness, actually we can draw upon these same ideas from the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, we see them now, and we've seen them for in Shakespeare's time and in his stories as well. It's interesting to think that about the audience for this novel and the audience for these stories, but actually it's about human nature, and these stories are the same. Like, these are about universal ideas, aren't they? And they carry through. They're human stories. Even though it's quite grand, we've got huge battles and leaders and kings and queens, they're actually very human stories. But for these audiences, when reading Malouf, having that background understanding of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the basics of Achilles and Hector and Priam, before you read it, would have helped you to see that Malouf is doing something different to this. Whereas with the Queen, the audience for that film, they would know about Diana. They would know about that previous event in history, and then the film is an insight into other areas and into other ideas or moments that happened during that event. So here's how I would analyze that about the idea of time. Malouf is demonstrating the timelessness of this tale and the universal questions or themes about what it is to be a leader, and also show one's humanity. Friers similarly uses his retrospective film to explore and perhaps justify Queen Elizabeth's actions in the lead-up to her tribute, but also to show a change and modernization of her monarchy. So that's how I would analyze this timelessness and use of time in both of them. All right, let's jump into the plot points of part 5. So we've got Priam and Somax. They're leaving the Myrmidons' camp. They're passing desperate and poor people among the barrows. And the barrows are these graves that have been covered with dirt. These people are scavenging for wood or anything of value. They might pick out a pin or a small trinket or something from someone's body. Priam gets out of the cart to view his son's body, and we see that this is a really poignant moment, and it's really about what is not said. Okay, so when you read over that section, you think, what just happened? He got out, he looked at the body, there's these muffled sounds or something or other. Somax, it's like we're hearing Somax's point of view on what Priam is doing. But Priam is grieving, and he's kind of crying and weeping and making these. He's not silent, but he's not speaking either. He's making these kind of sounds of grieving. Somax then looks forward to seeing his granddaughter happy and healthy. That's what Hermes said would happen. He also looks forward to seeing that life will return to normal at the end of the trip. And then they go and they pass through the streams again. That's quite uneventful, but Malouf makes a point that they pass through the streams, and then there's that moment they reflect. There's no God there waiting for them or helping them through. Priam remembers earlier his delight at the water, the fish, and the taste of the griddle cakes. So as Priam moves through those spaces again, he remembers all that wonderful new stuff that he experienced. And he's delighted when he sees Troy again. So he's actually becoming restored again, but he's changed. He's a changed man because he has felt the water, and he's seen the fish, and the taste of the griddle cakes have really had an impact on him, and he's changed through that, despite the fact that he's going back to his royal position. So Achilles, though, on the other hand, he's in his hut, but he feels renewed. With Hector's body taken, he is renewed and he is himself again. Then we have this kind of flash across. We have this flash across the sea and then forward in time. It's a really odd kind of use of time here. We've got it implies that at the same time that Achilles is in his hut feeling renewed, Neoptolemus is on his way in a boat. So Neoptolemus is sailing across the sea at the same time, and then there's this vision of Neoptolemus bursting into the palace in Troy and finding Priam in order to avenge his father Achilles. So he goes sideways in time and then forward, and then there's this horrible. The telling of Neoptolemus killing Priam is really a horrible thing. Like, it's not pleasant. We've got Somax, and he's thinking of getting something nice for his granddaughter and his daughter-in-law. And then Somax is excited about the tale he gets to tell. But then he also sees further into the future when Troy is reduced to a windswept hilltop. Like, he sees that in time Troy will fall, and whereas Somax then, he's in a town not far away from there, but in a time when people don't really remember Troy and they actually doubt Somax. The future looks bleak for the people of Troy after the city falls. So it really is this kind of tragic ending. It's kind of this, this petering out of Troy. We don't have this grand kind of sacking of Troy at the end. We don't have this huge battle or the end of Troy. We don't have big flames. We've got this kind of petering out of Troy and the legacy that it leaves. So, and then in the final little part, we've got Somax telling his stories to anyone who will share a drink with him, and then also the description of beauty. The final lines are about his mule Beauty, so that's an interesting thing for comparison there. Let's have a look at some of the symbols here. So stories, I think stories is an interesting part. There's this discussion of story and how stories work, and that's how part 5 ends. A description of Somax storytelling and how few believe the story that we've just read. So that's an interesting way to explore what Malouf is doing. Malouf is actually discussing storytelling. We've got this interesting symbol as well of the fiery redhead Neoptolemus, so Achilles' son. He's described as a furious boy, flame-headed, whose body is a furnace. So he is full of all that anger that his father felt. And he looks like, this description here on page 212 looks very similar to the one describing Achilles in part 1. So Neoptolemus' vengeance demonstrates that Achilles does die and Priam also dies. So we've got that vision of the future, and then we see, oh yeah, Achilles is dead. The connection between the two is short-lived and replaced with anger and grief. So whatever they achieved, whatever Priam and Achilles achieved in that hut that night about empathy and that connection that they had is very short-lived. And so that anger and grief that was trapping them and that was released at that time has actually then gone on to trap Neoptolemus. So they've got this kind of cycle that happens with killing one person and then they have family members seeking vengeance. We've got Hector's body leaving Achilles' camp, so that's a symbol of restoration for both Priam and Achilles. It makes them whole again. For Priam, it's described like this: Priam feels a state of exultant well-being, and for Achilles, he feels a lightness that is both new and a return. So he's returning to this state of lightness, but it's a new sort of lightness. So that's an interesting way to describe that. Let's have a look at some interesting quotes here. We've got Priam refusing help, climbs down, walks round to the bed of the cart, and at last lifts the coverlet from the face of his son. So this is where he stops Somax and says, hey, I need to go and see my son now. He actually gets to grieve then. He gets to grieve as a father. He hasn't seen his son's body up until that point. And when he was leaving the camp, he was trying to be very stoic and kingly on his way out. But this is the point where he felt safe enough to stop and have a look at his son, and then he's crying or weeping or whatever he's doing, but he's making these soft noises. He hears the small sounds Priam is making. They are wordless, but he understands them well enough. So Somax really resonates with Priam's grief, which is interesting when you compare that to the silence of Buckingham Palace and the crowd. But also, this is the Queen's kind of perspective on things. This is the protocol. You know, silence says more than words, and she's supposed to be stoic about it and just get on with things. Here also we have this idea that it's wordless but not silent. So there's action taking place. The grief has action and movement, but there's no words associated with that grief. It is only a provisional triumph, of course. The gods are not to be trusted when they tilt the balance momentarily in your favour. So this is a reflection on how Priam and Somax have left and the gods have taken them that far, but also that they can't count on that because the gods are shifty and they're tricky and they're dodgy in the way they interact with humankind. It's a provisional triumph. So provisional is like momentary or of the moment. He has done something for which he will be remembered for as long as such stories are told. Here's an interesting thing as Priam reflects on what he's done, and he knows he's going to die, and probably Troy is going to fall and it's going to be a tragic ending, but at least he's done something worthy of being remembered. He was going to die anyway. If Troy falls, Priam is dead. But he has gone and done something which is different from other monarchs, different from other kings. And you compare that to the Queen. The Queen has done something different. She's changed the protocol. She's doing something different than what she would normally do, or what she's learnt to do. There's interesting phrasing here. I am still here, but the I is different. So this is Priam reflecting on himself, and it's italicized. That I is italicized. So Malouf is using that font there, that italicized font, to say something. And what is he talking about? He's talking about how even though he is still Priam and a king and a man and a father, he has been changed through the course of this interaction with Achilles and his son dying. So that grief has actually changed him. I come as a man of sorrow, bringing the body of my son for burial, but I come also as a hero of the deed that Toll now has never attempted. So we see there Priam was reflecting on what he's actually achieved by this. Well, what's the purpose of it? He gets to bury his son, he's going to die anyway, but what has he actually achieved? Well, he's a hero because of this. Last few quotes here. And feels his homecoming now as the coming home to a state of exultant well-being in which he too is divinely led, as by music. So he feels that it's right that he goes back to Troy. It is a moment of triumph for him, and he is feeling an exultant well-being there. In his hut, Achilles too is visited by a lightness that is both new and a return. So this is how each of the leaders have changed. They were trapped by grief and anger, but through Priam coming to take Hector's body, both of them are restored. To be son to the great Achilles is a burden. So here's this kind of the impact that having a father like Achilles has on sons and children, that actually Neoptolemus has to live up to Achilles' name because he's so closely associated with it. So, which is similar to Charles. Elizabeth has been well loved for so long, and Charles feels that the public don't like him, but he has to live up to the expectation of the monarch of being king one day. And so he kind of gloats in some ways in some parts of the film, and says that now they finally see what it is that the public don't like them, and they feel that. And Charles has felt that very deeply many moments in his life as well. Nothing here has gone cleanly or as he wished, all botched. So this is where Neoptolemus kills Priam, and it's a really ugly, horrible death. It's not a clean kill, and there's a few different quotes in there that you can have a look at. The smell of shit is in the air, and it's just a hideous description. I thought you could also compare that to the killing of Hector. There's this beautiful kind of sacred moment between Achilles and Hector, where Achilles is killing him, and it's like time stops for that. But in this killing, this kind of is the opposite of that. This is Neoptolemus getting revenge, as Achilles was getting revenge, but Neoptolemus, he achieves it, but it doesn't go cleanly, and it's not a sacred moment, and it's pretty horrible, actually. I also thought you could compare this to the Queen Elizabeth's use of protocol to inform her behaviour. So Neoptolemus thought, this is going to be great, like I'm getting vengeance on my father, and I'm angry, and he's almost like Ares. The similar description for Neoptolemus as for Achilles when he was filled with rage. So he's kind of fulfilling what should be done. You get vengeance on the person who killed your father. That's what you do. But it doesn't go well for him. So when Queen Elizabeth uses protocol to inform her response to Diana's death, it doesn't go well for her either. And there's a public outcry about it. Notice here at the end, when Neoptolemus kills Priam, he says, "Pardon me, father," like he's sorry, he's regretful about it, he's remorseful. And it's the opposite of triumph, isn't it? That Neoptolemus should feel a sense of triumph that he's done the right thing by his father. Instead, he feels the opposite. So just some comparisons to the Queen here. We've got this idea of storytelling, and I discussed that earlier, but I think the comparison there is that Friers is using this retelling. His film is a retelling of the time when Diana died, but it's really kind of telling the Queen's story and how they reacted, and it really sheds some light on, it kind of justifies her decision making, or gives the public an insight into the way she thought about it, rather than just viewing her as cold-hearted and things. We get insight into Blair's involvement and the Queen and the way she didn't really understand it, and then how she changed as well. So about this is, if we're dealing with it about the idea of storytelling, Friers is doing interesting things with his storytelling, as Malouf is also doing interesting things with his storytelling. The endings are interesting to note as well, in comparison to the Queen. The Queen ends with Blair and the Queen Elizabeth having a heated discussion, but also it's quite positive. There's this positive resolution. They they understand each other, and then they go about their business and they get on with life. So it's actually a really positive ending. Whereas for Ransom, it ends with Somax, as he's known about his town as someone who tells tall tales, and that he was mostly remembered for his mule, Beauty, who is known by everyone as a charming creature and was much talked about. So the endings for the Queen is super positive, but for Ransom is actually ending in tragedy, and even the last survivor of the story, Somax, is not really believed, and he's just kind of a bit of a joke in town for his tall tales, and all that he's good for is a good story. And also we've got Troy falling, and it's not really a triumphant ending to the war. Nobody wins at the end of Ransom, and it's a bit of a downer. So just on that comparison of tragedy and victory, Ransom seems to end in tragedy. Despite Priam's effort, Troy still falls, and the best thing that he has done is ransom his son, which puts him in the realm of legends. So the person who wins out of this, well, Priam wins because he's made a legend out of himself. And by legend, I mean, these stories that are told and hyperbolized over time. The Queen ends with a heated discussion, though Blair and the Queen have formed a respect for each other and have moved more towards each other's way of thinking. So the Queen has actually modernized a little bit, and Blair has actually softened to traditional values a little bit as well. So that's an interesting thing that happens with the leaders. They move towards, closer towards the middle there. I've also thought this is interesting, a comparison of beauty and ugliness. Ransom moves from the beauty of Troy in the start of part 5. It's actually quite a beautiful description of Troy, to its destruction and ugly sacking and killing of Priam. Though the Queen seems as though things are restored to their previous glory, and the Queen's reputation is restored also, the ugliness of the paparazzi is not seen here. So they leave that for Diana, and they actually kind of paint the paparazzi as the perpetrators of a crime there. They are responsible for her death. And they leave that right in the middle of the film. They don't bring the paparazzi to the end. They actually have this private moment at the end. Ransom ends with both leaders dead and a feeling of hopelessness. So here's what Neoptolemus feels after he kills Priam. In a swift reversal, so the reversal is how he was feeling just prior to the death, prior to the killing. In a swift reversal, is replaced by crushing disappointment, heart sickness, animal sadness, and despondency. That animal sadness is an interesting way to describe it, because we've got these animal allusions throughout the novel, but it's not a human quality, is it? It's naming it as an animal emotion. The last thing is the generation. So one of my students, Eliza, was talking about this and brought it up that Achilles killing a rabbit at the beginning as a child mirrors Neoptolemus killing Priam. So I thought that was interesting that Neoptolemus kills Priam for his father, and Achilles also kills the rabbit for his father. They're both boys looking for affirmation of their father. It doesn't end well for Neoptolemus, and for Achilles it kind of is a side thought, like, oh, actually, Patroclus has turned up, and the rabbit becomes kind of secondary to that meeting of Patroclus. So here's the comparison to the Queen. Prince Charles seeks to promote himself as a modernizer when he calls Blair. This undermines Queen Elizabeth and puts them at odds with each other. Charles is Elizabeth's successor, and he is seeking to show that the monarchy can move with the times, even if the present monarch, Elizabeth, cannot. So we've got their generations who are kind of at odds with each other, or struggling with each other like that. Thanks very much, guys. That's the end of Ransom.